They did everything right. Extra blankets. Sealed gaps. Bodies close together. By midnight, the tent felt almost warm. By 4 in the morning, they were colder than when they started. And the thing that made the difference was invisible. Weightless. And already inside the tent with them. There is one mistake that survivors in displacement camps learn to avoid after a single winter. One error that seems logical, feels correct, and slowly turns a survivable night into a dangerous one. Aid workers see it every season. Medical teams treat its consequences every morning. And once you understand what it is, you will never think about cold weather the same way. If you want to learn survival techniques that most people never encounter, subscribe to this channel. We document methods developed by families facing conditions that would challenge anyone. Now, let us talk about the mistake that seems like the right thing to do. When temperatures drop below zero, the human instinct is simple. Keep the heat in. Seal every gap. Block every draft. Trap every degree of warmth the body produces. This logic feels undeniable. Heat escapes through openings. Therefore, eliminate openings. In a house with proper ventilation systems, heating infrastructure, and moisture management, this logic works. In a tent with 4 people breathing, no mechanical systems, and temperatures that fluctuate by 30 degrees between day and night, this logic kills. The mistake is sealing the shelter completely. Not partially. Completely. Every gap covered. Every draft blocked. Every opening stuffed with cloth or plastic. The intent is survival. The result is the opposite. Here is what happens inside a sealed tent on a freezing night. For adults, produce approximately 1 liter of water vapor through breathing alone over 8 hours. Add perspiration, even minimal perspiration from bodies working to maintain temperature. Add moisture from any cooking, any wet clothing brought inside, any snow tracked in on shoes. The total moisture output can exceed 2 liters per night. That water has nowhere to go. In open air, humidity disperses. Wind carries it away. In a sealed space, it accumulates. The relative humidity inside a sealed tent can climb from 30% to 80% in 4 hours. And 80% humidity at near freezing temperatures creates a phenomenon that most people never consider until they experience it. The dew point. Every volume of air has a maximum amount of water vapor it can hold. This maximum decreases as temperature drops. When air cools to the point where it cannot hold its current moisture, that moisture condenses. It becomes liquid. It appears on every cold surface. The tent walls. The blankets. The clothing. In a sealed tent, the walls are the coldest surfaces. They radiate heat to the outside air. Moisture condenses on them first. By morning, the interior walls are wet. Water droplets form. They run down the fabric. They pool at the base. And when the sun rises and warms the tent, that moisture evaporates back into the air. The cycle begins again. But the walls are not the only surfaces that collect moisture. The blankets absorb it. Slowly. Invisibly. A drywall blanket has an insulation value measured by its ability to trap still air. Air is a poor conductor of heat. Wool fibers create thousands of tiny pockets that hold air motionless. This is why blankets work. Wet wool has almost no insulation value. Water conducts heat 25 times faster than air. When moisture saturates blanket fibers, those air pockets fill with water instead. The blanket becomes a conductor. A pathway for heat to escape the body rather than a barrier keeping it in. A family that seals their tent to stay warm wakes up with damp blankets. They feel the cold more intensely than they did at midnight, even though the air temperature has not changed. They add another blanket. That blanket absorbs moisture too. By the 3rd night, every piece of bedding carries water weight. The situation compounds. This is the trap. The colder you feel, the more you want to seal the space. The more you seal the space, the more moisture accumulates. The more moisture accumulates, the less your insulation works. The less your insulation works, the colder you feel. Survivors break this cycle with a technique that seems like madness the first time you hear it. They open the tent. Not fully. Not enough to create a direct wind channel. But strategically. A small vent position high on one side. Another position low on the opposite side. The warm, moist air rises. It exits through the high vent. Cold, dry air enters through the low vent to replace it. This costs heat. There is no denying that. The air temperature inside the tent drops. But the trade is worth it. Dry cold air at -5 degrees is more survivable than humid air at +2 degrees with saturated blankets. The physics are counterintuitive but absolute. A body can generate heat to warm dry air. A body cannot generate heat fast enough to overcome wet insulation pulling warmth away through conduction. Experienced families learn to read the signs. When the tent walls begin to glisten, ventilation is overdue. When breath becomes visible inside the shelter, humidity is climbing. When blankets feel heavier than they did the night before, the moisture cycle has already begun. There is a window for correction. If ventilation is introduced before fabric saturation reaches critical levels, the damage reverses. Dry air pulls moisture out of materials. Blankets recover their insulation value. The cycle breaks. But if that window closes, recovery requires resources most families do not have. Wet blankets must be dried. In freezing conditions without heating infrastructure, drying takes sunlight and time. During the hours that blankets hang outside, the family has no insulation for the coming night. The mistake cascades. Medical reports from winter camps document a pattern. Respiratory infections peak not during the coldest weeks but during the weeks following temperature drops. The correlation is not with cold air. It is with humidity. Families that seal their tents to survive cold nights create interior environments where mold grows, bacteria thrives, and immune systems face constant challenge. Children are most vulnerable. Their respiratory systems are still developing. Their bodies have less mass to generate heat and less reserve to fight infection. A child sleeping in a humid tent breathes air carrying not just moisture but the biological load that moisture supports. The correct approach looks wrong at first glance. It feels like inviting the enemy inside. But survivors understand something that instinct does not teach. The enemy is not cold air. The enemy is what happens when moisture has nowhere to escape. There is a saying among aid workers who have spent multiple winters in displacement camps. You can fight the cold. You cannot fight the wet. Every resource devoted to fighting cold, adding blankets, sealing gaps, layering clothing, fails when moisture undermines the materials themselves. Some families develop systems. Ventilation schedules based on occupancy. If 4 people sleep inside, the vent opens for 10 minutes every 2 hours. If 6 people crowd in during extreme cold, the vent stays permanently cracked. The calculations are not precise. They are learned through consequence. The moisture mistake takes different forms depending on context. In some camps, families receive plastic sheeting to waterproof their shelters from rain and snow. This sheeting works perfectly for external moisture. It creates disaster for internal moisture. Plastic does not breathe. Every drop of vapor produced inside stays inside. Tents wrapped in plastic become condensation chambers. The adaptation is partial coverage. Plastic on the outer layer, positioned to shed rain. Gaps at the base and peak to allow air exchange. The shelter is not perfectly waterproof. But it is survivable. In other contexts, the mistake manifests through cooking. A small stove or fire inside a tent produces warmth. It also produces steam from heated water, moisture from combustion, and humidity from any food preparation. Families that cook with full tent closure gain immediate warmth. They lose it by midnight when condensation peaks. The solution is timing. Cooking happens with ventilation open. The moisture exits with the smoke and steam. After cooking, the tent is sealed for 30 minutes to capture residual heat. Then ventilation resumes to manage lingering humidity. These protocols seem complicated. They are not. They become automatic after a single season. Open. Close. Check walls. Feel blankets. Adjust. There is a physical marker that experienced survivors use to gauge the critical threshold. Breath visibility. In dry cold air, exhaled breath produces a brief visible cloud that dissipates quickly. In saturated air, that cloud lingers. It expands. If you can watch your breath hang in the air for more than 2 seconds, humidity is too high. Ventilation is overdue. The mistake has economic consequences beyond health. Blankets damaged by repeated moisture cycles must be replaced. Aid distributions cannot keep pace with replacement needs. A family that loses 2 blankets to moisture saturation in December faces January with inadequate coverage. The error committed in week 1 echoes through the entire winter. Some camps have developed communal solutions. Drying areas where blankets can be rotated through limited sunlight hours. Families contribute to a pool. Each day, some blankets dry while others are in use. The system requires trust, coordination, and infrastructure that not all camps possess. For families acting alone, prevention is the only viable strategy. The mistake cannot be fixed easily once committed. It must be avoided from the first cold night. Here's what the first night should look like. Before sleep, the family assesses humidity. If condensation is already visible, ventilation opens before bodies add more moisture. Bedding is arranged on elevated surfaces when possible to avoid ground moisture transfer. A small opening is left unsealed throughout the night, positioned away from sleeping areas to avoid direct draft. The air will be colder. There is no avoiding that. But the blankets will be dry by morning. The family will wake without that deep chill that signals insulation failure. The cycle will not begin. When the temperature drops below -15, the calculus changes. External air is so cold that any ventilation creates severe heat loss. In these conditions, the vent must be smaller. The moisture accumulation must be accepted partially. Families sleep in shifts to allow one person to manage conditions while others rest. They monitor for the dangerous signs. They act faster when those signs appear. There is no perfect solution. Only trade-offs managed with skill. The families who have survived multiple winters share this knowledge automatically. New arrivals receive instruction. Not as formal teaching. As observation. Watch what the experienced families do. Watch where they position their vents. Watch when they open and close them. Watch how they arrange their sleeping areas relative to moisture accumulation patterns. This transferred knowledge is survival itself. A family learning alone, through trial and error, may not survive the learning curve. A family learning from neighbors who have already made the mistake compresses years of experience into days. The one mistake that refugees cannot afford is the one that seems most logical. Sealing everything. Trapping every degree. Fighting the cold with every available barrier. The cold can be fought. The wet cannot. And when the wet wins, it wins invisibly, gradually, through nights that feel almost successful until the morning reveals what was lost. If you learned something today, leave a like and tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced what happens when moisture meets cold? Campers encounter this. Homeowners during power outages discover it. Anyone who has woken up with damp bedding understands the principle even if they did not know the physics. For more techniques that displacement camp survivors have developed, including how they manage food, water, and heat through months of freezing conditions, explore this channel. The knowledge exists. It was built through experience no one would choose. But once built, it belongs to anyone willing to learn. The mistake is simple to name. Harder to avoid when your body is cold and every instinct says seal the gaps. But now you know what happens next. And knowing changes everything.